All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Butel. I'm the Assistant Director of Practice Performance for THN. Welcome to the Specialty Division meeting, doing things a little bit differently, obviously, right now. We'd normally be at the Marriott, but we're going to make do with the best we can. Just some housekeeping for tonight. Everyone that joined they joined on mute, so you shouldn't have to worry about muting and unmuting. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and post those questions in the chat box. And there's a drop down that'll you can specify who you want those questions to go to. If you'll just pick the all panelists, that'll make it a little easier for us at the end. We will try to get to as many questions as we can, depending on obviously how many there are. Jim is going to start us out, and then Dr. Osborne, and then Dr. Grapey. And then we'll have 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, Dr. Osborne, if you want to take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for the Specialty Division Town Hall. Again, as Matt said, a little bit of an unusual way to do it, but we'll get through everything. And I'm going to the first 30 minutes or so for a variety of topics that we're going to cover today. First one, well, here's the list of things: the incentive report, some status updates, Innovator, the THN app, and some new physician onboarding information. So it is time for our incentive payments to go out. I'm happy to report that they're going to go out within the next 2 weeks, probably around 10 days or so from now. But I want to give you some perspective on the history of THN incentives over the years. You can see that in each year we have done well. And of course, this is 2020, so that means our incentive is for work done in 2019. So, but you can see here that we've progressively increased, and we've increased this year to a record $9 million distribution. And of course, as we know, the last 2 years for 2018 and 19 plan years, 2019 and 20 payment years, there are payments of the 5% advanced alternative payment model bonus that's part of MACRA. And we estimate that to be about $4 to $6 million for our physicians. So we're very pleased with our ability to pay out this incentive for all the hard work that's being done by our primary care physicians and by our specialist division members as well. Thought you might be interested to see where some of these funds come from. So this chart over here shows the number of or the amount of each part of the incentive by plan. The Next Gen ACO contributed about 17% of it. United Healthcare was about 37%, Humana about 26%, and Health Team Advantage about 18%. Now these funds do include some money that was left over from last year that we did not distribute on purpose, and we did that again, by the way, this year. I'll cover that in a moment. We always hold back a little bit of incentive because we never quite know what the future is going to bring. You'll recall that there are two types of funds in our incentive program. We have a baseline fund, and then we have a full margin fund. The rules for distribution of those funds are slightly different, but pretty similar. You can see that about 44% of the fund was from the baseline fund, and about 56% of the payout was from the full margin fund. And in terms of the ratio of payments to primary care to specialty physicians, from a total dollar point of view, it was about 1 to 1. And from a per MD basis, the ratio here was about 3.78 to 1 for primary care to specialists. Now, some of you might be thinking, why do primary care physicians get so much on a per MD basis? Well, it's basically because without primary care physicians, we do not have an ACO. It's the primary care physicians whose patients are brought into the ACO by their participation, and it's also the hard work they do on quality. And most of our RAF, about 80% of our RAF tasks are done by our primary care physicians, and so it's critical that we incent them well. So again, last year that ratio was about 3.75 to 1. This year, 3.78 to 1. Very similar to what we've had in the past. So what are the actual numbers? Well, the primary care pool has about $4 million in it this year. The specialty pool about $3.9 million. There were significant unearned funds this year for primary care physicians that had to do with unearned quality bonuses, as well as unearned bonuses or incentives payments related to referral management software. The specialists left behind $900,000, and that too was due to lack of use of the referral management system or lack of engagement. And so that was a lot left behind. I'm going to talk in a moment about what happens to that money. In terms of those actual payments, the maximum payment for a primary care physician was pretty good, $84,000. Now the minimum was $0. I didn't bother to put that, but it was $84,000. The mean was $18,000. For specialists, the max was the minimum was again $0. I didn't put that, and the maximum was $45,000 with a mean of about $3,500. So very good payouts, I think, this year on our incentive plan. Now, what happens with this 1.2 million, or this 300,000, this 900,000 together? This will be distributed next year, or is available for distribution next year. It stays in the physician incentive pool. We held back $3 million this year, especially because we didn't know where COVID was heading for us this year. So we held back $3 million. So we actually have $4.2 million already in the physician incentive for payout in 2021 for work done in 2020. I'll comment in a few minutes about how 2020 is going, and I think we can look forward, unless we get slammed by COVID at the end of the year, which is always a possibility. I think we have an opportunity to possibly even do better next year in terms of our payout. That's not a promise, but things are looking pretty decent. Now, I did want to comment on the fact that all of you are participants in THN, and by that you get a payment from Medicare that's equal to 5% of your Medicare Medicare paid claims last year, and that will happen this year as it did last year. And I just want to comment on this. This is a slide that Dave Grapey put together for me, and I think it's appropriately titled that it's nice to have the 5%. For those of you who may not recall, when MACRA came about, it did get rid of the doc fix, which was a great relief for many of us, but it put into place this thing called MIPS, the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System. And in MIPS, physicians had to do an array of things that were some of the old quality metrics that they'd done in the past, as well as meaningful use and several other things. And they had to continue to do that in order to have an opportunity to get a bonus. And they said, if you do really well, you could get as high as 9%. I think that was the max they said you might be able to get. And so some people were wondering, do I want to go into an ACO where I could get 5%? Do I want to go to MIPS where I might get up to 9%? I'm a good practice. I'm doing good. Well, here we have 3 of the best ACOs in America that were not considered to be advanced alternative payment models because of the way they had their contract with CMS. And you can see that this group had a perfect score. They scored 100%, and their positive adjustment is 1.8%. This group had a near perfect score, 1.6%. This group, a near perfect score, 1.8% as well. So the point here is, boy, it's nice to have that 5% just because you're a THN. We do ask a lot of you, and we know that. But compared to doing MIPS, what we ask is not that great, and the payout is even better. So we're really excited about how this is looking for us as an advanced alternative payment model, and of course that payment will continue for the next few years as well. A little bit more about the 2019 incentive. You'll recall that a good deal of this had to do with projects, and I'm happy to report that 66 different practices submitted project plans and then had to submit project reports. That was amazing. Really great work, everybody. So good. Thanks for doing that. And I'm happy to report that 3 of them got our top 3 award. These are not in any particular order, but Greensboro Radiology, Eagle Endocrinology, or Dr. Jeff Kerr, and Greensboro Ophthalmology. Let me briefly comment that Greensboro Radiology worked with our data aggregator and point of care tool provider, KPN, to provide diagnoses that were in a radiology report, but not really the reason for the radiology report. So the result of that was they ended up able to show us a number of diagnoses that were risk adjusting that were important to capture and clinically important, things like atherosclerosis of the aorta or emphysema, some things like that. So clinically important, but also risk adjusting. And the result of that was probably, we estimate $4 to $5 million more for THN. So way to go, Greensboro Radiology. Of course, Eagle Endocrinology is only one provider, but he did great work in regard to analyzing some of his use of a certain medication early in the year and altering it after new data came out. So we applaud his efforts, even though it was just not the financial return of Greensboro Radiology. Showed some really great work in use of this electronic medical record. And Greensboro Ophthalmology had a really simple thing where they just reminded people that they are actually on call. Things that people don't always realize, that their doctors are actually on call and they don't have to go to the emergency room. Result was that Greensboro Ophthalmology got a few more calls on the weekends, but the result was they kept the people out of the emergency room. You know, sometimes we think that the things that we tell patients aren't remembered very well, but they proved to us once again that a simple comment from a provider can go a long way. So we were very happy with their work. Honorable mention this year was with Hecker Ophthalmology, CHMG Heart Care, LeBauer Pulmonary, the Wake Forest Emergency Physicians, and Elements Dermatology, all for great projects and great work. So again, a great job for everybody for 2019, a pretty good payout for our incentive plan, great work for everybody. Thanks very much for all that you do. So what about 2020? Well, 2020, let me just briefly, I'm not going to give you a whole slide on financial performance, but I'll just say it's positive. And some of you know why, and that's because you haven't been as busy. Of course, if you're not as busy, that means people aren't in the hospital as much. And from a THN point of view, I hate to tell you, that's not a bad thing. We understand it's a bad thing for you. We want people to get the care they need, but we have had record low utilization of a variety of things over the last few months. We expect that's going to catch up, but financial performance year to date looks pretty good. Even before COVID hit, our financial performance was looking positive. So I think we are going to have a nice incentive plan for next year and a nice incentive payout. So we're looking forward to that next year. Now, of course, COVID did kind of mess up our planning for our 2020 incentive projects. Initially, the projects had to be submitted by about April. We then extended that, as you know, from various communications we've had with you out to July 31st. But this year we are raising the bar. The project had to be more meaningful and likely to decrease care variation or costs. Some of the simpler ones that we allowed people to do last year, we simply weren't allowing people to do that. We did send another number of these projects back to the project owners to tell them that we did not think it was substantial enough, and they have submitted new ones to us, so we're very happy about that. The incentive will be 40% based on project work, 40% based on use of the referral management software, and 20% on engagement. And you're getting some engagement points tonight by being here. Now, because of the late start for the 2020 projects, we are going to allow some projects to be carried through to 2021. That has to be agreed upon by the Physician Alternative Payment Committee of THN, along with the specialty practice doing the project. But we will carry some of these projects through to 2021. Some of them, while substantive, were not that substantive, and we probably won't let those go into 2021. But for a lot of them, we are going to let them roll on into 2021. Now, here's a change. Your lead physician or administrator in charge of 2021 projects are going to need to supply us some simple quarterly interim reports as we go through the year. We've got a one-page form for this, nothing elaborate. We just want to be sure you're doing some work through the year. To tell you the truth, we have a little suspicion that last year people did a little bit at the beginning of the year and something at the end of the year, but not much paying attention to it in the middle. We need you to pay attention through the whole time. So that's our plan for 2020 and into 2021. Now, turning to another topic, I am happy to report that the Operating Committee and the Board of Managers has waived our dues for 2020. This was due to the COVID crisis. We thought it was probably not the best thing to do when people were struggling to see patients and stuff like that to ask for their dues payment. This is not setting a precedent for future years. We'll take this every year if there are special circumstances, and we hope that we don't have a special circumstance like this in the future. But if there were special circumstances like this in the future, we might consider it again. But it was waived by the operating committee and board of managers. So if you were looking for that bill, you don't need to look for it anymore. Let me turn real quick to a thing that THN is really excited about, and that is the development and implementation of an analytic and reporting platform. This has been something that we have been needing for a long time. We have really been almost sometimes flying, if not blind, at least with slightly grayed out sunglasses on, because it's not always been with great knowledge. We have been trying to develop something internally for a good while, but finally decided that we were not going to be able to do that adequately and that there were great platforms out in the market. So we spent about 6 months in late 2019 and into the early part of this year looking for a platform. And we needed that platform to allow us to understand our utilization, our quality gaps, so similar stuff that KPN is doing for us, but more so, and RAF. And it had to be able to give us standard, meaningful reports so that we could see what's going on. It needed to provide quick answers to some of the most standard questions. And then when we had extra questions, we needed it to be able to tell us more. It has to be able to handle Medicare, Medicare Advantage, commercial, and self-employed plans, our own and others that we might work with in the future. It needs to help with care management, including risk stratification. We needed a physician dashboard and reporting, and we needed a leader dashboard and reporting. So we wanted something that you could use to see how you're doing in the care of your patients in terms of cost and quality, and we needed our leaders to be able to see that as well. The platform needs to be able to ingest KPN data, connect to the EMRs covering most of our patients, claims data, and laboratory and radiology data. And then we also wanted it to provide data for THN and non-THN patients, because quality doesn't end with THN patients. We think you should be treating everybody just as well as you treat your THN patients, and we want to be able to provide you data on that as we go. We started out by looking at 7 groups here. KPN has an analytic reporting platform that's different than KPN Optimized that we've been doing. Milliman, Innovacer, Care Journey, Cedargate, Maestro, which was associated with a company called Lumeris out of St. Louis, and Arcadia. These are all great systems and great organizations that have a lot of talent. The first round, we got rid of 4 of those just based on what we were seeing. That left us with Arcadia, Innovacer, and Maestro. We spent a lot of time on these. Eventually then getting rid of Arcadia because it and Innovacer were very similar. Maestro and Innovacer were different. So we spent a long time looking at these, and we looked at innovation ability, cost, practice transformation support, the actual functionality of the platform, and references. And the winner is a company called Innovacer. So we are currently now contracted with Innovacer to start to ingest our claims, our data from KPN and from our EMRs. So you'll hear more about them in the future. We are very excited about this. We think this is going to be fundamental to our ability to transform care in our area, to really understand areas where we have perhaps extra spend in areas that are not of high value. We're going to talk more about that later. And so really, really critical. We're very excited about it. This is not going to happen in 3 months. These processes take upwards to 6 to 12 months to get into place. We have a fairly aggressive schedule to try to start to upload claims and get things going. You know, as a physician, I had no idea how hard this was, honestly, until I started working even more so with claims, even in the last year. Claims are kind of a mess. If you think about it, a claim was never meant to be a data source. It was meant to be a way to pay people. So there's a lot of cleaning up of claims that have to be done, and that's what Innovacer does well with these various MA plans and commercial plans, et cetera, and so they can ingest it into a standard data format that we can understand. Now, Innovacer actually takes data from everywhere. So from our primary care offices and our specialty offices in some situations, from our hospitals, from our health plans, and as I mentioned, from KPN. So we'll be moving data from KPN over into their data activation platform, which is kind of where everything gets ingested. Now, KPN is not going away. KPN's served an important function for us. It's not going anywhere. And so we'll continue to monitor that, but right now they're an important component of this whole thing. And so it produces unified patient record. And then they have various applications that they use on it. EndNote is a a way to actually have almost a electronic, if you will, point of care tool that slides in across the EMR. Doesn't have to be integrated in the EMR. Very clever thing. InCare is the care management portfolio. And InGraph is where we'll get most of our data. So that's where we're going to be getting dashboards and other things that help us see what we're doing and where we're going. So again, very excited about this. You're going to hear more about it. You're going to start to see reports from this probably in the next few months. And we will socialize this and get you used to seeing these reports and helping those reports tell us where best to help us all provide the best care for our patients. Now, switching gears slightly to a slightly simpler technology than Innovation, let me speak for a moment about a thing called the THN app. You might not have known that there is a THN app, but there is. Here's a screenshot of the Apple Store. And if you type in Triad Healthcare Network, this is what you're going to get. And so you need to download that into your phone. There's also one available on Google Play. And then when you open it, the first screen you're going to see is the update page. And this is going to have a series of updates. These are often going to be things that we've already sent out to you in email and things like that. But if you have further questions or want to look at it again, then you can take a quick peek. Now, there is this thing called directory. And right then you think, well, that's where I'll find a doc. Not so fast. That directory is actually to help you find your practice performance specialist. That is the THN staff member who is assigned to your practice. So when you click on directory, looks like Amy Robson, one of our practice performance specialty, is in every practice in the entire, in a whole long list. But really what you do is just type in the name of your practice and you will get the phone number and email of the the practice performance specialist for your practice. So that's what that directory is. Now, if you click on the resources button, this is where you can go out to our website if you want to find a doc, maybe find an address, a phone number, something like that. And then we've got a variety of other tabs here. If you do want to click on one of these tabs, be sure you click on the address right here. To be honest with you, I thought this wasn't working very well one day because I kept pushing on this like a button. But just push on this link and it'll take you out in your browser on your phone to the website, and it's very handy. We will be continuing to improve this app. It's pretty simple right now. We're going to continue to improve it, integrate it, hopefully be able to get you some information on it, maybe even particular for your practice once we get up and rolling with Innovation. The last thing I want to talk about is a very important thing. I know I'm just bouncing around here, but the last thing I'm going to talk about today is physician onboarding. So this is a new program or a new requirement for new physicians who are participating now with Triad Healthcare Network. The reason for this is a lot of money goes through our company in terms of medical costs. The number of patients that we have at risk or in shared savings is close to $1 billion in medical costs. And we're at risk for that. So a 1% miss is a lot of money. So we are dependent on quality outcomes as measured by how people are satisfied with their care, as well as the standard quality metrics. We need to maximize our revenue and benchmarks to be coding correctly, and we need people to understand that. And these things are all pretty complicated, and in order to get good at it, it takes some time, as you well know. So many of you are pretty good at this stuff. Some of you maybe not so good, but you know, you're getting better. So we've got this disparate proficiency in these areas. And usually the people who've been with us the longest have the most understanding of this. But again, as I've said, small misses in quality targets have resulted in millions of dollars in lost revenue. So it's really, really, really important that all of our new physicians, and preferably all of our new providers, have a baseline level of knowledge necessary to be successful in value-based care. And to that end, we have developed a physician onboarding series, and that requires participation in either the CHMG Live Orientation Program, if you're a CHMG provider, or if you're an independent provider, you have to participate in a THN 101 live presentation. We have not had one of those yet this year. We're kind of waiting a little bit longer in the year to have enough providers to participate. We've been doing these right along as CHMG, with CHMG as they do this through the year. After that initial presentation, If you're a primary care physician, you have to watch 2 videos. One's called RAF 101 and the other is on CAPS, and that's on quality and patient experience. And once you've done all 3 of these things as a primary care physician, you are eligible to participate in THN bonuses for that year. Now, of course, we can't control whether you get macro points or you get your macro money or not. That's not up to us. But if you want to be eligible for THN incentives, you have to do these 3 things. Now, if you're a specialist, you can see we've got the same CAPS thing, and we have another video on low value care. And again, this is going to be a requirement. Now, to be completely transparent here, you could do this right at the end of the year and be eligible for the whole year. But frankly, we prefer if you did this as soon as possible. So that's where we are with the THN physician onboarding. Your administrators know the necessity of this, so we are communicating with them about it. Again, the first THN 101 live presentation for our independent physicians will be a little bit later in the year. So with that, I am going to quit sharing my screen, and I am going to switch it over to Dave. And
thank you, Tim.
There we go.
Let's see if we can get this going. All right, everyone see?
Looks good, Dave.
All right,
Yes.
Great. All right, well, thank you all for showing up. I wish I could do this in person. I really do miss seeing my friends. For the back half of this talk, my theme is really going to be around network performance. These are not new ideas, but I think they need a refresh. We need some reinforcement. It's really critical at this point that we work more and more cohesively and collaboratively, whether that's THN and our physicians, it's THN and the hospital, it's primary care and specialists. I think we got a taste of what we're up against with Blue Cross Blue Shield coming in and putting a narrow network and stealing away some of our patients, but I hope to convince you that primary care has become so valuable that there are alternative models and entities that would love to steal them away from us and leave us really potentially without an ACO if that were to really happen in any large numbers. So I want to discuss again the importance of the network fidelity. We're going to look a little bit at facility leakage, if we're making any difference. I want to talk about transfers out of the system, and then a little bit at the individual specialist level about how you're performing, what the leakage rate is, how much of our work is really outside of THN. And all these slides will be available after the presentation. So as we go through these and you don't see something, you'll get all this in a PDF form so you can review it at your leisure. We want to look at referral management as a tool to really help us be high performing as a network. I think it's really important that providers understand the cost of care, and I'd like to give you always a little insight about what it costs in a certain aspect of care, what the opportunity might be. I think it's important that as stewards of this that we understand that and we know where we can make differences. It's really important that specialists continue to think about how they remain relevant and really thrive in value-based care. I do have to tell you that the next gen ACO model is ending. We've been very successful with that model on a very consistent basis, but look forward to hopefully the next model and being successful in that. And then Bright Health and the opportunity and the partnership with Cone to earn back those patients that we've lost to Wake Forest and Blue Cross Blue Shield. So back to the old slide on network fidelity. Now, we all know there are a lot of reasons that a patient may choose care elsewhere. Some of these things we can control more than others. Same things we've talked about, access, making sure we have enough slots, that we have no provider shortages. Critical in all this is the referral process, making sure that patients aren't falling through the cracks, that they understand and have some insight into where they're going and when they're going. And working on patient preferences, legacy, patterns, marketing our network. And these are all things that we need to work on. Now, we're constantly monitoring our network utilization. We use claims, which probably ultimately provide some of the most accurate data. but it lags 3 to 4 months. And so real time, we're starting to use the referral management system as much as possible. We also use patient ping to really be able to see where our patients are presenting to various facilities. Overall, through our network, we end up losing 20 to 30%, depending on what service line, what business element you're talking about. You know, within the facility arena, it's more in the 20 to 25% range. But for each 1% of this business that we can recapture, this is $4 to $6 million that is here for THN providers, to include Cone Health. And if it goes to a particular practice, if it goes to my old practice at Alliance Urology, it may stay there. For some patients who are kept and recaptured, that means revenue for the radiologist or the pathologist, the radiation oncologist, potentially Cone Health, potentially our surgical center, but it stays within our community. So this is what it looks like right now from a facility standpoint. Now, because of Cone's ongoing discussions and efforts to incorporate Randolph at all possible, for the last several years, we've considered Randolph to be a network, along with Cone and Alamance, the Annie-Pan, Wesley Long, obviously. And so as you look at the various payers, United Healthcare, Humana, NextGen, HTA, and then we have a weighted average, we can look across from 18 to 2019. And things are fairly consistent. We've made a little bit of progress overall, but less than 1%. 2020 is really inconclusive at this time. Because of claims delay, we really only have a couple of months of 2020, and then of course COVID hit, and so the numbers for the rest of this year are going to be difficult to really interpret. But obviously still a lot of opportunity. And when you look at patients who are leaving the Cone facility for academic medical centers, while there is certainly some transplant cases, you know, extensive traumas, rare cancers, etc., the vast majority of the DRGs that are leaking out and showing up at academic medical centers are the same DRGs that we care for at Cone Health, that I believe we care for with even higher quality and certainly lower costs. And that's sepsis, heart failure, knee, joint replacement, spinal cases, you know, and the list goes on. Nothing out of the ordinary, the same list that really populates the Cone Health data as well. Now, it's bad enough that patients choose to have their care elsewhere, be it at Baptist or Duke. But to me, it's almost inexcusable when they actually present, to our facility, be it the emergency room at Alamance or maybe at Med Center High Point, or are admitted to one of our facilities and then leave and are transferred to an academic center or potentially an alternative community hospital. Every month, we get a transfer report by one of the Cone Analytic folks that talks about all the patients who were in the facility and transfer for some reason. Some of these are behavioral health transfers. They may go to Beacon Place for hospice. But there's quite a few patients who are in the emergency room or even admitted to our hospital who subsequently get transferred to a supposed higher level of care, often bypassing Cone and going to UNC, Duke, or Baptist. Over 500 of these occur in a year, and the vast majority emanate from Alamance Regional Hospital, mostly due to some legacy effects, the fact that we don't have all the service lines covered, and, you know, of course, some, again, the historic transfer patterns. We've done a lot of deeper dives into this and really trying to understand why these patients leave. Some of these cases are quite appropriate. A patient may have had a major procedure at Duke and then had a complication, showed up in the emergency room at Alamance, and now needs to be transferred back to their physician who performed the surgery. Sometimes it might be somebody who has most of their care at a particular facility, and for continuity of care, sometimes patients absolutely are adamant about going to a particular facility. But many of these cases, and when you look at the DRGs, are very routine care, subdurals, heart failure, patients who've had fractures, a whole host of things that we normally take care of. A lot of this emanates from the neurosurgical service line, and that's due to the lack of neurosurgeons' presence from our facility out at Alamance. I will call out general surgery in that they've been extremely proactive in coming together with us and meeting as groups from Annie Penn, from Randolph, from Cone System, as well as in Burlington to meet, and have met several times now to discuss how they can work more cohesively and collaboratively to try to retain these patients within our system. And that's just the kind of efforts that we need. So I appreciate that and applaud them for those efforts. Some of this ultimately falls on the shoulders of our primary care providers. PCPs cannot control completely where a patient goes for care, but certainly they can influence that. And the more a PCP discusses with their patient the importance of the network, talks about how through collaboration and continuity of care, it's better, that the care is better. And as those patients trust their PCP, they'll outreach to them to ask them very often, especially for elective types of admissions, where they need to be going. And so we also want to highlight to our primary care providers how they're performing. And so we think that socialization of scorecards are really important to try to change behavior and raise people's awareness about the importance of this and how they can do better. We start usually by showing the top performers. And so, for example, recently in the Beacon, we published this showing the practices that had less than 15% of their attributed members, patients who had admissions that occurred out of network. So again, trying to highlight really good work. From an ambulatory standpoint, we also want to look at what happens that's not in a facility, but rather what's going on in the offices, E&M codes, procedures within an office. So again, we've tried to recently update, now that we have complete 2019 data, we have this based on both claims paid and also the number of patients. So we have specialties listed here. We can see the out-of-network patients from 18 to 19, what percentage that represented and what the change was. Again, you'll have this so you can look. Matt and I are happy to schedule conversations with leaders of various specialties or practices to try to provide additional information about where these cases are going and potentially from whom and for what reason. So one of the key things when we discuss referrals and increasing the value of care is the referral management system and the ability to really understand what the patterns of referrals are. And it's also really important that physicians understand that consequences of a particular specialty and their referral patterns and decisions may greatly affect the entire ACO. We already saw that there's huge opportunities in revenue recapture. Work done at Cone rather than Duke and Chapel Hill is less expensive for the same DRG, and therefore THN saves money that can be distributed. Patients often are more satisfied if they can stay within their home community. We feel quality is equal or better. Referral management system really allows us to address this, and along with the patient's experience of care, that is really critical. In order to really do this, we really need the analytics, and we've put a referral management system in place, and now we're starting to build the analytic platforms that we need to really be able to monitor and, more importantly, share with practices the data and allow them the opportunity to improve and to do things that might help further their access and their ability to capture this market share. So when we first did our incentive in 2019 around referral management, we said, please sign up for referral management. And in essence, every practice in THN really did. A few signed up late and were penalized for that, but the vast majority of practices did sign up for referral management. Signing up for the system doesn't do any good unless you log in. So in 2019, we also asked practices to log in on a regular basis, especially on the specialty side, because if a referral is sent to a specialist on Monday, they don't get around to logging in the system until Friday. That's a patient who potentially is anxious, uninformed, and may actually seek care elsewhere. We've continued this into 2020, and this just shows you some of our practices at the top who have been logging in more than 100% of the time, because they do log in potentially on some holidays that we recognize or some weekends. And we've asked specialists as a benchmark to log in at least 80% of the days. But logging is not enough. We have some groups on here that are all green who have continued and do really an awesome job with referrals. We have other practices who do seem to log in on a regular basis, but don't actually work the referrals. And so for 2020, as we build this data, we said in the incentive plan, it's not enough just to log in, that's part of it, but we really want capable or competent use of the referral management system. And we're also starting to look at metrics, performance. We've said that urgent consults should be seen within 7 days, and we may have to adjust that, but we want to establish some baselines and some benchmarks that we can share with the network, really sort of define what we think should be the standard of care in our community, and then help practices get there. So this is the kind of thing that we'll see on the dashboard. You can see, for example, sent referrals over time. Many of these months, as we were getting ramped up, you can see an early part of this year in January and February, we were approaching 10,000 referrals a month. I believe there's probably more like 15,000 within our network. So there's still some that are being faxed out, especially those that are being sent out of network to various places, and some practices still not using the referral management system to its full capabilities. But you can see 10,000 referrals a month going through that system, allowing us a lot of insight. COVID hit and we dropped down probably by, down lower than 4,000 a month, and now we're starting to ramp up. We can also see other metrics like average days to employment by specialty for urgent referrals. Now, this is populated on the dashboard, but we haven't vetted this data, so we're not using this to judge anybody, and anything you see on here should be taken with a grain of salt, and there's a lot of practices underneath this scroll. So, but this is the kind of information that we really need. We need to be able to see what performance is, help practices understand if they're really lagging behind, and seeing what can be done to improve that access. All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the costs. Now, you've seen this slide before, but it's extremely important that our providers in THN really understand our business model. So Jim said we have about 900 million, close to $1 billion. And in essence, that number comes from two places. In our ACO, where we're at risk, it's a benchmark. So CMS says you have 27,000 plus odd patients, given all that's happened historically, their risk scores, their ages, all these different factors, we think it's $300 million. And that's an approximate benchmark that we have. And that means if the cost is $301 million, then we got to pay them back $1 million. If it comes to $250 million, we have $50 million, although there are some limitations and some on how much you can actually save or how much you have to pay back. On the MA side, where we have these full risk agreements with the Uniteds, the Humanas, and the Aetnas of the world, they give us generally a % of their premium. So they get 100% of the money from the government, again, based on the nature of the patients that they have under their plan, based on their age, their sex, and how their risk adjustment. And so United might get about $1,000 on average for every one of those patients every month. And we get 79% of that, and in Humana's case, 85% of that to render the care, while they keep that off the top for their administrative marketing work and their profit. And so that's our pie, but we only have that pie because of primary care. If the primary care doctor is not in our ACO, then we have none of these patients. So it's absolutely the most critical element is having primary care. And then it's how many patients you have, and then these factors. That pie shrinks or expands based on quality, either in the ACO based on the NextGen program or the star ratings in Medicare Advantage. And that quality is determined by gaps in care, the things we hear about, colonoscopies, mammography screening, hemoglobin A1C. But as I'll show you later, more and more important and more relevant to the specialists is patients' experience of care. So CAP surveys, whether you think that's important or not, are becoming hugely important in the quality component. And so CMS has really taken a stand that patients' experience of care is every bit, and potentially the way they're grading things now, more important than many of these historic quality metrics. Risk adjustment is critical. This has fallen on the shoulders of primary care, but we have a lot to offer from a specialty side to actually participate and contribute to this. Remember that the average Medicare patient has a risk adjustment score of 1.0, a 1% increase. So if with appropriate coding, you could get a population's risk score that was averaging 1.0, for example, to 1.01 across 85,000 Medicare patients like we have. That's close to $10 million in increased revenue. So it's very important. And every time we miss an opportunity, whether it's metastatic cancer that we haven't coded, all kinds of things, ostomies, various pains and ailments that occur, some of which are much less likely to be captured by primary care. It contributes greatly to our success. And money saved is money earned, because again, every unnecessary procedure avoided, every readmission that we can keep from happening ultimately flows to the ACO. So to talk a little bit about funds, where we spend our money. In the next gen, again, I said we have about a $300 million benchmark. Average next gen patient is about $10,000 in costs. So where does that go? Where is some of that spend? So in this particular slide, we're looking at med and surgical inpatient admissions. So about a third of our spend goes to admissions. And within that, the four most expensive DRGs are two elective ones: spinal and hip replacement, spinal procedures and hip replacement, and then sepsis and heart failure. But what I'd like to focus on a little bit, and where we're putting together some work and collaborating with the hospitals around ambulatory care sensitive admissions. So these are conditions, CHF, COPD, UTI, and other complications like diabetes, where if you really provide timely, appropriate outpatient care and monitoring, you can avoid, not all by any means, but many of these admissions. You're always going to have patients who are non-compliant. You're going to have patients that no matter what you do or how many services you throw at them are going to require hospital admission. But as you can imagine, proper transitions of care, education, outreach, remote monitoring, and programs that we have can eliminate a lot of these admissions and readmissions, such that we spend a little over 12 million on just the next gen patients. So probably closer to 30 to 40 million across our entire book of business on these types of admissions. About 3/4 of these occurring within a Cone facility. A 20% reduction, which is very realistic, is $2 or $3 million right there. These admissions to the hospital are of very low value. While the hospital does get some revenue, averaging $6,000 or $7,000 for these DRGs, and they do get several $1,000s that contributes to their what they call their contribution margin. At the end of the day, these provide little value to the hospital, and for every one of these admissions that we avoid, that's $6 million in that revenue that went to the hospital that is now saved, and the margin for us not doing it is probably more like 90%, as opposed to the very little, if not negative, margin for the hospital. In addition to the admission, there's the post-acute spend that adds another $5,000 or $6,000 for all of these. And so this is the kind of work that we have to work with collaboratively, understanding also its effect on the hospital, but how we ultimately as an enterprise do much better if we avoid these types of admissions, or at least reduce them. The other place where there's a lot of opportunity is on Part B drugs. We're generally not at risk for Part D drugs within our ACO, with the exception of Health Team Advantage, which is at risk. But for all of our contracts, the general prescription drugs and the costs of those do not fall into our risk. What we obviously have to pay attention to medication adherence, and so there are pharmacy aspects that are very, very important to us. But where we are at risk is Part B drugs. So these are the drugs that are generally injectable and infusible drugs that are usually not self-administered and that are furnished and administered as part of a physician service. And we spend in the next gen an average of $1,000 per beneficiary per year, or about $27 million. And so there's a lot of opportunity to have this kind of analysis. We have some new pharmacists that joined us at THN, and one of the things they did was to start to do deeper dives into some of our Part B drugs. And the first thing they looked at was ophthalmology. And The results they found were not really surprising to me at all. Our ophthalmologists have been an extremely engaged group, and from the very beginning of THN, as we brought in North Texas specialty physicians, our ophthalmologists were on board at looking at some of the high costs of the Part B drugs, especially for the anti-VEGF injections that are used for a lot of retinal conditions. And so for conditions like age-related wet macular degeneration, other retinopathies, there are two FDA-approved drugs, Eylea and Lucentis, but there is also an FDA-approved drug called Avastin, which is not FDA-approved for this use, but is for colon cancer, and is used increasingly and often by ophthalmologists, especially those in value-based networks, for treatment of these conditions, as opposed to the markedly higher cost Lucentis and Eylea. Those two drugs, branded, cost around $2,000 for a treatment, whereas Avastin's about $50. Now, Avastin in many studies has been shown to be none inferior to the branded products. But of course, in the Part B world, we have perverse incentives such that given in the office, providers make 6%, and 6% of $2,000 is a heck of a lot more than 6% of $50. And so it's not surprising. There are other reasons too. It's not just financial. But it was not surprising whatsoever to me to see that our ophthalmologists within THN have, when appropriate, used Avastin in greatly outnumbering the use of the more expensive products, and probably only in cases where Avastin was not the recommended or best treatment for those members, as opposed to, again, our non-THN specialists and the claims analysis. And a lot of potential cost savings depending on how much that can be reduced. I looked at this in Health Team Advantage and saw the same pattern. We had 10 of the ophthalmologists that we looked at that had the most claims. The 5 that were non-THN had by far and away markedly higher claims for the Eylea and Lucentis. This doesn't mean that they're not performing just as well as ophthalmologists. Some of these non-THN ophthalmologists are terrific, and there's nothing wrong. In fact, many would argue that maybe with FDA approval, that is the gold standard care. But from a value-based perspective, Avastin clearly is the right choice for the vast majority of these patients. So again, I applaud the efforts of our ophthalmologists to do this work. Looking at another example, however, I have, I think, a real need to look more closely. This is our next-gen population and what we spend every year for autoimmune drugs on the Part B side. So below we have a list of all the ACOs in our collaborative. There are 50, and each of these ACOs has a per beneficiary per year spend on autoimmune drugs. The lowest being $25, the highest being just slightly over $200. We came in second on that list. What's the right number? I have no idea. The average is around 100. Is 100 correct? These are complicated conditions. It's quite possible that the right amount is somewhere in here. Maybe it's at 150. Maybe this is really poor care. Maybe these ACOs don't have access to rheumatologists. Maybe these rheumatologists aren't actually using the products that really provide, and it's not just rheumatologists, but the providers are not using the autoimmune drugs that are really indicated for treating these conditions. I don't know, but it seems that if you have this kind of 8-fold difference across ACOs that all potentially are networks that are more advanced in terms of it and their treatment, their protocols, that you really have to ask yourself, how do you dig in and find what the right answer is and what's the opportunity? So for specialists, I think the real key is to continue to demonstrate value within ACO like THN or any type of value-based contracting. I've said this before, there are a large number of common high-cost diseases. You saw that when we talked about the ambulatory sensitive conditions, heart failure, COPD, where specialist care is really important. That improved collaboration and coordination of care really comes from that alignment with specialists. I'll show you in a second that CAP survey scores are really critical and are every bit as important on the specialty side as they are in primary care. Great opportunity for RAF capture, especially for certain specialties that have these conditions that do risk adjust, and then reducing low value and no value care. The downside to specialists is diluted incentives, and we have twice as many specialists as we do primary care. And even though primary care doctors in our ACO get considerably more incentive on average, it's still a lot of money that's distributed to specialists. And we risk driving PCPs to alternative models where they don't have to share. So there are a lot of opportunities, and more growing all the day, not only from government programs, but from venture capital and other groups that are trying to lure PCPs into programs where they may be able to have incentives that best what we're able to deliver in the ACO. So this is a tension that we face. And then, of course, just the administrative time and effort of adding, 800 additional physicians to an ACO. When we talk about how a specialist and what's their role in ACO, it's really right here. It's either being in the ACO or providing a high value network to the PCP. When we think about a PCP who has an average panel of about 1,000 docs, they are a CEO of a $10 million healthcare enterprise. And historically, they made $200,000 or $300,000. So out of that 10 million, they kept 2 or 3%. 20, 30 years ago, the HMOs came around, and it was all about gatekeepers. Don't give these patients away, keep them, keep them, keep them. And there was lack of co-management, lack of expert care, poor experience from patients, and that was fairly short-lived. I think then we really fell to this bottom where there wasn't a lot of referral management. PCPs would send to old classmates or golfing buddies, or many times they would do their best to send referrals based on reputation or patient experience. Hey, this is the orthopod that patients seem to love. He's got a great reputation. And so it was a lot of reputational referrals. And now more and more PCPs have to understand, and do understand, that this is really key to their success, because in many models, if they're able to reduce that care from 10 million to 9 million, in the old days, they kept their 200 or 300,000. In new models, and in some places of the country, and especially if they're in a value-based contract by themselves where they share nothing else, that $1 million, maybe 80% of it goes to them. So now they're not making 200,000, they're making $1 million because of that reduced care. And that does happen in places in the country, and those are the kind of models that we have to potentially watch and compete against. It's also been shown that in ACOs where there are more specialty visits relative to ACOs who really try to limit those, there's actually better performance. And Jim Osborne always says we'll never go broke with E&M visits, and that's really true. Tapping into the expertise of specialists is really critical if you're going to manage patients well. But what's equally important is that you're sending them to specialists who are going to provide that expert care and just the needed care, and aren't going to look at the patient and get every test. The urologist that orders a cysto and a flow rate and a CT scan and everything else on every patient that comes in with voiding symptoms, rather than providing high value assessment and exam and does the appropriate amount of testing. So that's how we have to look at this. And so, for example, we have specialists in our ACO, but others don't. So if you go to Raleigh and you look at key providers, key physicians, they are primary care based. And so what they do is they go out and look for specialist networks that they can collaborate with. So this is off their website, but it was interesting. And to be even considered, you have to apply and you have to develop a value proposition. What makes your practice value-minded beyond procedure costs? What are you doing? I assume they mean to lower the reduced care, use appropriate care. You have to have a resume. Which practices do you work with? They're asking if available performance data. I'm sure someday this will be required. Letters of recommendation. And so, it's important that we have that mindset as specialists, that if we're part of an ACO, this is how we have to think. We have to be thinking how we collaborate. And this is the kind of work that we need to do. And we shouldn't take for granted our ability just to be in a network without putting forth some effort to bring value to that network. Where we have some opportunity is, we've been historically shut out a lot when it comes to the quality metrics. So when we say HEDIS, these are the standard metrics. So this is star rating. So this is a pie chart showing that in 2019, if you're a Medicare Advantage plan, if you're Humana, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, this is how you're going to get your star rating that's critical to your success. So you have a lot of stuff on your own. You have to do administrative work. How often do you, what's your results on dealing with appeals and grievances, things like that. This is where THN was always scored, and this is how we really ultimately are, how well we do is determined is on these HEDIS metrics. So these include colonoscopy, mammography, all the things we already talked about that some specialists contribute to, but mostly is under the purview and really under the responsibility of primary care. CAP surveys, about half that. Fast forward to 2023. Right now, the way they are proposing the star measures, HEDIS shrinks to 14%. CAP surveys are going up to now double HEDIS. So it's a fourfold increase in the importance of CAPs relative to stars. Why is that important? Well, one of the reasons is we do well in that. But it also means that our entire network can contribute to success, and it's really not just thrust upon primary care and the responsibility for doing this. So these are some preliminary CAP scores for 2020 from Health Team Advantage. We just got these. You can see, so for example, care coordination. This is asking patients, did the doctor you saw, primary care specialist, did they have the records? Did they seem to know what was going on? Had they gotten information from other doctors? This is the kind of thing that our point of care tool and our referral management system helps us do well. Getting appointments and care quickly. We haven't done that well in the past, but we really are bumping up now and improving greatly in terms of being able to get both regular, routine, and urgent appointments quickly, getting needed care. And given our makeup of our network with, 2/3 of our physicians being specialists, our importance in these questions really has increased greatly. And these questions and the importance of CAP surveys have made specialist contribution and performance much more critical going forward. So just a couple more slides. This is the last year 2021 will be the last year of the Next Gen program. Originally, the Next Gen was scheduled to go away in 2020, and we were left with deciding between two new programs. Because of COVID and the problems getting some of these other programs launched, CMMI has decided to extend the Next Gen program an additional year, so we'll participate in 2021 as well. The presumption is that it will indeed then go away. And there are two different programs that we'll have to examine. We've had some actuaries and some consultants in to run our numbers. These are very different programs from the Next Gen. Sometimes it may seem like subtle differences, but how benchmarks are established, how risk adjustment works, all these things really are critical. It can make all the difference in the world as to whether you be successful or not. These are complicated. Not all the answers are out, especially for direct contracting. You should know that direct contracting is moving ACOs almost into what's like a Medicare Advantage plan. So taking some of the work that we did in Next Gen, but putting components of Medicare Advantage such that these direct contracting entities, which THN would then become, actually have to negotiate some payment arrangements with participant providers. One of the things that's always important is that in some of these models, only some of the providers actually qualify for the QP status that gets you out of MIPS and gives you that automatic 5%. And so it's a little different, not so much in MSSP Enhanced, but for direct contracting. And I don't say that to raise any concerns at this point, but these are things that you'll have to consider. And as we decide where we're going to take the ACO in terms of the next model, we'll certainly want you to be aware of how you have to ultimately position yourself so that you're more of a participant or in the preferred provider camp, such that it may ultimately impact you within that whole macro legislation. This is just again and I can't overemphasize the alternative models and potential opportunities for primary care in this country around these value-based contracts. CPC Plus is an advanced alternative payment model available just to primary care. It was launched in areas of the country that did not include the triad. There is a new model called Primary Care First. These models are limited in their geographic availability at this time, but will eventually expand through the country and offer primary care groups the opportunity to be in contracts like THN is with the government, but simply as primary care providers alone. And then, of course, if you're not aware, you should know that Aledade, in partnering with Blue Cross Blue Shield, now has some, I think, 100+ practices in North Carolina, continue to try to get primary care. If they sign up a primary care practice within our region that's in THN, those patients are no longer in THN. They're now in Aledade, and Aledade has their own ACO, and they've been successful. And the more they can deliver to primary care, the more primary care sells it to other primary care, and these are the things that we're competing against. Optum is another group that hasn't had a presence here so much, but in Colorado, in other areas of the country, they currently employ more physicians than Kaiser, and I believe are the biggest primary care group employer in the U.S. Oak Street Health, if you missed the news, Oak Street Health is now here, of course, in Greensboro. They're actually opening an office in High Point. But just to give you an idea of the value that some people are putting on primary care and this kind of value-based contracting, these models, Oak Street Health just went public, and in their offering were valued at $5 billion. Their stock spiked 90% on the first day. And I don't know what it's done this next couple of days, but their value, at least at one point, was $9 billion. $9 billion, this is a primary care practice that has 85,000 patients. Guess what? THN has 85,000 Medicare patients too. They have some, 55, 60 centers. Each of those centers has, 1 to 3 providers. So they have probably fewer primary care providers than us, same number of patients. And the really interesting thing is, if you read this, Oak Street is not profitable. THN is profitable. The amount of revenue they have is $556 million. If you think of the cost of care and how it really works in THN, we're really more like 900. So we have higher revenue, we're profitable, we have the same number of patients. Oak Street Health is valued at $9 billion. So, you can imagine that, I think this is an overvaluation, but this just gives you an idea of what people are willing to pay for this. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the Blue Cross Blue Shield network that developed with Wake Forest Baptist, and really forced 8,000 to 10,000 of the patients that were having care by our THN providers to leave our providers and to go to the narrow network that was at Wake Forest Baptist Health and continues to be there. These patients didn't necessarily have to leave Greensboro. As you know, Wake Forest has some clinics around town. I know my ex-partner is in Greensboro and sees patients. I guess there's a general surgeon at least. There are several specialties that come here. We lost, again, 8,000 to 10,000 patients from the exchange. This was an exclusive provider organization with Baptist Health. But we have an opportunity to gain those patients back. Your practice administrators should have received an email about 3 or 4 weeks ago talking about the THN and Cone partnership with Bright Health to offer individual and family plans on the ACA exchange in 2021. So these exchange products, of course, were very controversial at first. Insurance companies that went into them lost a lot of money. They're now quite profitable, and we fully expect them to be more popular than ever. You can imagine, with the loss of jobs within this area, that the number of patients potentially eligible or seeking insurance on these exchanges is likely to go up dramatically. So huge opportunity. There are limited payers. Blue Cross and Blue Shield came in again with this very narrow network with Baptist and had an extremely competitive product with regard to pricing, and that's why patients simply couldn't afford to stay with their Cone providers. But with this,
Dave, something just happened and we lost you there right then. Something happen?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, I apologize for that. So THN is going to act as a messenger, really, in communicating the fees and the terms for your acceptance and approval. And then once you approve those fees, then THN and our contracting person, Karen Bradish, will amend the THN PPO agreement to include Bright Health product. And so obviously it's a choice to participate. I think the fee schedule that I looked over was very reasonable, especially as we're trying to compete to get these patients back. So I hope this is an opportunity really to reestablish our network and to welcome these patients back to our community, and then hopefully actually take some from the other guy. So with that, I'm done. If there's questions, there'll be, I think Karen Bradish is available to answer any questions about Bright Health. Then Jim and I or Steve Knorr can answer additional questions, and I really appreciate you sticking around.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Jim and Dave. There's a significant amount of work that goes into getting these ready and for the presentation, and lots of market research and all of that stuff. So thanks again for putting it together. From the Q&A, we don't really have anything that I haven't been able to answer. So if you do want to ask something or have something on your mind, if you go ahead and post that now, we'll stick around. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, but if you do have a question that you want to get answered, feel free to send that in. You should have the email to your practice performance specialist, or you can download the app and get it from there. One clarification that I'll make is how you find your practice performance specialist, if you are a specialist, is you just search by your specialty in that directory, and that'll get you to the right person. We did record the meeting tonight that we can make available to everybody afterwards. So if you have colleagues, partners that need to, or you think that it would be valuable for them to see this, we can send it on to everybody. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and close, and I appreciate everybody coming and being available tonight, and we'll probably do this again sometime towards the end of the year.
Thank you, everybody, for your attendance and listening to everything, and be sure to give us questions if you need anything. Thank you.
Well done.